Guys, welcome to the podcast. Today is going to be an episode with Duwane Adams, and we just covered in the last episode mule deer on the Kaibab Plateau. We kind of recapped Duane's hunt last year, and he brings, I think, 38, 39 years experience to the guiding world of in Arizona. And this episode is going to be on Coues deer. We're going to go through units 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, and 36. Break down each individual unit, and Duane's going to weigh in on trends in the unit, densities in the unit, mountain ranges, etc. And I think you're going to get a lot of value out of this, especially with the Arizona draw deadline being June 13th, this Tuesday coming up. And I just want to thank Duwane for shedding all of the expertise and light on these units from years of knowledge and hunting. And he's kind of quote unquote the godfather of long range glassing and Coues deer hunting in Arizona with big optics. I know you guys are going to like this episode. I want to thank you guys, the listeners, for your loyal support. I want to encourage you, if you do listen to this podcast, make sure you subscribe to the podcast so when I release a new episode, it automatically comes on your phone and you don't have to go searching for it. If you guys want to send me any questions or comments or any pictures of your latest adventures, you can do so at jscottoutdoors@gmail.com. You can follow along on Instagram at jscottoutdoors.com. You can send me a direct message through there. I also want to thank the sponsors of the podcast, Go Hunt Insider, Coues Ultralight Hunting, Phone Scope, and The Outdoorsmans. And you can check the show notes in this of this episode to see the different discounts that you can get with these companies. And I appreciate you guys supporting these sponsors, and they make this podcast, the ability for this podcast to be free. And I appreciate their support, and I appreciate you guys supporting them and supporting me. Let's get right to this episode with Duwane Adams. To just kind of shotgun down through some of these units and have you just basically maybe tell me a little bit about the unit, maybe talk about some of the mountains. Obviously there's a lot of units, so we got a lot of ground to cover, but let's just dive in and talk about unit 29. And 29, I'm looking at the regs right now. There's the October 27th through November 2nd, November 10th through the 16th, December 1st through the 10th, and then the late hunt, which is December 15th through the 31st in unit 29. What do you know about 29? I believe the main mountain range there is the Chiricahuas. I've spent a little bit of time in there. Give me your thoughts on 29.
If you want to hunt 29, you have to do a tremendous amount of homework because there's a lot of private property. And you got to be able to work your way around that private property. But if you learn how to get around it, there's some really great places. But you just can't drive down there and think you're going to do it on a weekend and not spend the homework. Once you figure out some of the access to get into some of those places, then there's some gigantic bucks down there.
You know, it's one of those places, like a lot of those Sky Island mountain chains down there, where it has some big, bad, gnarly mountain, you know, high elevation, thick timber, although they've had some fires down there. But don't you think some of these units, like your 33s, like your 29s, like your 34As, that have some of those big, you know, even the 32s like the Galeros, have some of those real big, gnarly mountains that have that real thick brush? It seems like those units produce some big bucks because I think it's because some of those deer are up in that thick stuff, and then, you know, they get vulnerable at times and either, you know, get caught out in the open or come down for the rut. I was just curious on, you know, as opposed to like a unit like 36C that doesn't really have that real gnarly, you know, thick mountainside. I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Yeah, you hit it right on the head. It gives a chance to deer to grow up. And 29 has that 27 has that, 23, 33. They all have that magic thing that you're talking about. But most of that country, you better be able to put a backpack on. And that's what makes it really good, because there's very few roads that get you into that real brutal country to kill those deer. And that's how those deer are surviving, because first you got to backpack into them, and secondly you have a big canopy so the deer can survive both ways. So that gives a chance for those deer to grow up. And there's gigantic bucks in 29. I actually believe there's gigantic bucks in every unit. There's just not as many as in other units.
Okay. What about, let's talk about 30A and 30B, kind of talk about them together. I don't know a lot about either one of those units.
Well, I've kind of stayed out of those units again because of private property. That's another one of those private property places. Both those places down there are real structured. There's a couple of big ranches down there that you've got to work around, Jay. If you know how, and I figured it out, but it's taken me a lot of years, then you're kind of okay. But if you don't, then I hate to I tell people that all the time, Jay. You're going to have to spend some time because of the private property. 29 and those two units there have the most private property in the whole state of Arizona. The rest of the Coues deer units, it's wide open. You can go get it.
Okay. 31.
It's wide open.
31 has Mount Graham, right?
Mount Graham and the Santa Teresas.
Okay.
The Santa Teresas are to the north there, and they border the San Carlos Indian Reservation, and there's deer all in that zone, all the way down to the desert, all the way up to the Grahams, all the way flat down to Fort Grant, all the way down to the road there. There's Coues deer all over there, so that's a good unit.
Yeah, 31, I've spent some time there in the Santa Teresas and a little bit in the Grahams. It's a beautiful unit, like most of them are. I remember there's a place down there called Stanley Butte right there by San Carlos Indian Reservation.
Yep.
And it's just really neat country. Obviously, you've got the Aravaipa Canyon down there, kind of between 31 and 32, and it's a neat unit. One thing that's interesting about 31 is it seems to have one of the highest numbers of late season deer tags, in that it has 125 on that December 15th through the 31st. And when you compare that to some of the other units, I think it might be the highest number of late tags in there.
And I think you're exactly right. And the reason I think they did that is it sucks a lot of those deer come off the Grahams where it's so thick up there, and it gives them a chance to come down those slopes. Because I don't think it's very difficult to kill those monster bucks until they get in the ruck there.
While we're at it, while we're just talking about 31, all these units in southern Arizona, it looks like they have a like I said, the October 27th through November 2nd, November 10th through the 16th, December 1st through the 10th, and then the 15th through the 31st. Duwane, it used to be they had an October hunt, and then a November hunt, and then a December hunt, and now they've kind of added that new 1st of December, through the 10th hunt. What have you seen as far as, it seems like it's just nonstop pressure on those deer? What does that do to the deer? How does each hunt, how do you see each hunt progressing as far as quality of hunt and, quality of buck seen on those 4 hunts?
Well, you said a mouthful. In all honesty, I wish they didn't have that hunt. I wish they would just have the 3 hunts that you're talking about.
I agree with you.
Each hunt gets worse, is what it amounts to, and the quality of the deer get less and less and less. And unless you really know what you're doing, because most people, they'll hunt what they want to kill, a 3-point, for example, on the first day, and after a day and a half they shoot a spike, and that's really bad, because that could be a quality deer that could have grown up, but there are too many hunts. And the Catalinas even has one more than you're talking about. They have a muzzleloader hunt plus 2 youth hunts.
Yeah, that's I want to back up just for a second. So with those 4 hunts, the way I see it is guys that really do their homework can put in for that October hunt. And the only thing that they risk by putting in for the end of October is, yes, they get first crack, but the weather typically is a lot warmer, a lot hotter. Sometimes the deer aren't moving as much. One thing I have found is on some of those later hunts, you do get a little bit more reprieve from, super hot temperatures. Seems like there's maybe a little bit more deer movement, but from just a comfort standpoint of backpacking and what have you, sometimes it's a little more tolerable. Whereas those the first season, October 27th, you can have 90-degree temperatures still. It's kind of a toss up because the later you get, the better the weather is, a little more comfortable for humans. I don't think the deer really care at all. But speak to activity level. I mean, do you agree with me that you see a little more activity, see them out feeding a little bit more the later the hunts, or do you fear that they're shot up so much that they're running for cover?
Everything you say is the truth. You hit it on the head, exactly what I tell people. Literally, what you just said is exactly verbatim to what I say. There's only one advantage to the early season, and it can be an advantage, but you better know where that a big buck is, and you better had patterned him, because after about a day or so, and they start shooting, they won't be there. And then you also got to put up with the heat and the rattlesnakes and all of that stuff, and it's a big deterrent. What I found is if you don't kill that deer, you probably will never see them in that season again.
And so let's take that a step further. If you were planning, let's say, people listening to this are trying to plan out which hunt they're going to do, and they're going to put in a first choice, a second choice. A lot of people do, the latest December hunt, what people call the rut hunt, as the first choice, and then they maybe follow it up with one of the other three, or maybe they do all five,
Sure.
structure them however they do. Will you then, let's say you draw the second or the third hunt, will you actually pick different areas to hunt than maybe you would on the October 27th on the first hunt? I mean, will you go in deeper? Will you go in further? Like, mentally, how do you prepare, and strategize for some of those second and third hunts?
I go in. I wouldn't say go in farther, but I got to go to the trees, and
Okay.
so wherever that is, you've got to go where the deer feel safe. They have to have a canopy, and it's that simple. Or Jay, you got to go out in the flats. You got to go. You got to get out of that middle ground. You got to go out in the low country. Jay, I'm going to tell you a story. We chased a gigantic buck last year on the early season. Buck was in the 130s and didn't kill him. And we chased him on the second season and didn't kill him. And on the third season, we seen the deer, and he's way out in the flats, and he's a gigantic deer, way out. I'm talking close to the highway, Jay. A guy was riding on a four-wheeler. We bumped the deer. The deer goes up over the hill on the other side. He shoots it and scored 134.
Wow.
We come walking up to the deer, and there this gigantic deer was within 100 yards of his four-wheeler.
It happens, doesn't it?
It happens, but it doesn't happen that much. And I tell people that because we knew that deer was there, he didn't. And we kept playing. We'd go in there and hunt a day, and if we didn't see him, we'd go to another place. And then I'd send somebody else over there. Instead of a guy sitting there and having to hunt him 4 or 5 days, we knew this big buck was there, so we kept hunting in there. But we didn't kill it, but we actually scared it to somebody else, and they killed it.
Duwane, asking you a question about that hunt. Do you feel like you made a mistake by not putting an absolute full court press with, every single day, circling the wagons? I mean, was there ever a point where you thought, we bumped him, he's gone? Or was it truly you just kept staying, or, did you truly stay after him, or did you make a mistake on that deer?
Well, and that's just part of guiding. I mean, I second guess myself a lot of times, but you can only look at that flat country so much that you want to turn the gun on each other.
Yeah.
Because, and I'm being honest, because
Yeah.
it's just rolling cut hills, and you can't get enough advantages, Jay, that you can see miles and miles and miles. If I had the tag, I could stay there until hell freezes over. But when you're taking a client, he can only take so much of that.
Yeah, because
And
you're not seeing a lot of deer. You're looking at the
no,
same hill,
no.
and you're, there's people buzzing around, and in the back of your mind, it's human nature to be like, well, did that deer move? He's really not here. Like, we
Jay,
should be,
this deer was 300 yards off the main highway, killed. The
Wow.
main highway. And so this deer was staying within a half a mile to three-quarters of a mile from the highway. We seen him by accident, is how we seen him run across the road going in early one morning. And then my son-in-law and I, Nick DeBaca, we went to another gear. And I said, this is where that deer's at. Okay, we got to figure it out. So the sun came up. I said, we got to get on that hill. So, and we had just scouting this place. This was in the summer. So we walked across there, killed 2 rattlers, walking over there, got on that knob, and then I told my son-in-law, Nick, I said, he's out there. Nick, he started looking. Nick says, there he is. I said, where? He had another 100-inch buck with him, and he had another 90-inch buck with him. And they're all 3 together. And we started watching him, and then he went off of this little cut, and he never come out of it. And the cut couldn't have been 10 feet. We didn't see the deer for another 3 weeks, and kept going in there and popping and looking, and then we'd pick him up. It was so flat and so thick with just miles of ocotillas and little washes. That's how he survived. Yeah. So you can only take a guy, Jay, there so long, and he's going to say, let's go somewhere else, Mr. Adams. He said, I don't think there's nothing here. Well, you can't argue with somebody when it's like that, because it's their tag, it's not mine.
Yeah, for sure. That brings me to another question of most big deer that you've been around in your life, most big deer, from summer to the time that they rut, like their life cycle, if you had to give a radius or a circle of how much ground do they move around, or how tight of a circle on the biggest, some of the biggest bucks you've been around, do they have a big wide circle, or do they have a real tight circle?
No, but it's more tight than people ever dream. And the only time that it gets untight is during the rut, and they don't even like doing it then. That's what I found. Most big bucks, you'll hear people say they live and die within a mile. I don't think it's that big. I think they live and die within a half of that. And I think that they figured out something to survive, like this buck that I'm talking about. And whatever that is, it is. And they stay there, and they either die or they get killed. But mostly they literally live until old age and die in holes like that. Look, the Yount boys are as good a deer hunters as there is Coues deer hunters. The daughter, their sister, has killed 3 Boone and Crockett bucks, all over 120. And these boys take their sister, and they've all killed Boone and Crockett bucks with a bow and rifles and on and on. And I talk to these kids because they're as good a Coues deer hunters as there is in America. And they're hunting one canyon, one place, just like me. And their dad, Dana, taught them that. They're staying there, and they're moving from point to point. 2 years ago, the brother killed a 132, and he never left the rock for 5 days. Same rock, look at the same place.
So what I take from that, Duwane, and I agree with a lot of what you're saying, what I take from that, and I try and tell people myself, is Coues deer are a really unique animal in the fact that if you find a big giant buck and you find him any time other than the rut, I'm going to tell you, if you keep going back to the same spot or going to different points, but basically using the center point where you saw the buck as like the nucleus, like that's your home area, and pound all around it and don't get too far away, that's how you find those big bucks. That's how you kill those big bucks, because they live in those big ones live in a little tight circle, just like you said.
That's how Jay, this year, I have killed in my hunting career 499 Coues deer. I'm one deer short of 500. And
wow.
every one of those deer, Jay, has taught me a tremendous lesson. And that's what I try to teach my son-in-law and these guys that are working with me. And, don't take big deer for granted that they're going to be there just because it's a rut. When you figure them out outside the rut, then you are a killer. And that's what I tell them. Yeah. Then you got them down.
And that's where that's where those early hunts, that's where those October 27th early hunts can be a gem, because you get first crack at them, you pattern a buck, you can pattern him all summer long, and then he's going to be right there. Stay on the same rock, don't leave it until you kill the buck. I mean, guys that I've interviewed over and over and over, the Coues deer hunters, they say, when you find a big buck, you hunt that buck until you kill him, or the season expires.
That's right. And that I give the exact same advice, but you can't do that with clients. I mean, I've been guiding
it's the right client. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but you don't get the right client. I mean,
yeah,
I have the right client, and I'll tell you his name. His name's Doc Finale. He's killed 21 bucks with me from Las Vegas, and he's about the only guy that I've guided. He's killed 4 Boone and Crockett bucks with me. If I tell him there's a big buck in here, and I say, Red, there's a big buck here. We're gonna stay here. He said, whatever you say, Duwane, and he'll get up underneath the tree and go to sleep. And that's how he'll sit there, and he'll get up and get a drink of water, eat some sandwich, sit there, and he has done that with me on 4 occasions. He's killed 4 Boone and Crockett bucks, and it's taken me days and days and days. He doesn't pound me, doesn't tell me we got to move, but Jay, that's not the norm for clients.
Yeah, that's true. That's really true. Let's jump over to Unit 32, which I know is close to your heart. Obviously, Unit 32 is the Galeros and the Winchesters. Talk to me about Unit 32.
A lot of great deer. A lot of places that the Galeros and the Winchesters have a tremendous amount of deer. From one end, from Aravaipa Canyon on the north end, all the way down to the Winchesters on the south end. You can come in through Mule Shoe at that ranch and just hike in any direction, and there's Coues deer, and you can come in from a tabletop on this side or Turkey Creek from the other side. There's deer in the whole mountain range, and lots of deer.
What have you seen? I mean, you've been hunting it for what, 30, 40 years now?
Yes, right. I've been guiding it for 38. I've been hunting it since I was a boy.
What have you seen as far as any, is there still the same amount of deer as there used to be? Is there more? Is there less? Pretty much
I'm often asked that same question you just asked right there. And I don't know if I'm a better hunter, or I just think there's just as many deer.
Okay.
And we're still seeing lots of bucks, still quality bucks. We're not seeing the deer that along the road, but we're not along the road. We're hunting places that people don't think that there's deer or don't want to work to where those deer are, and that's why we're seeing lots of deer.
Okay, good stuff. I love the Galeros and the Winchesters. That's just absolute beautiful country. I mean, that's Sombrero Butte country, the Redfield Canyon. You've got Aravaipa on the north. Like you said, Turkey Creek and Deer Creek over there on the east.
Yep.
One thing about 32, it's got a lot of really good access. It's got desert country. It's got that mid-range country, and then it's got some beautiful oak country. For sure, 32 is a real special unit. Let's talk about Unit 33, which I know is one of your favorites.
Well, I think 33. I think the best 3 units in the United States is 33, 27, and 23. I think there's bigger bucks in those 3 units than all the other units.
Why? Why?
Well, it's because of what you just said earlier. Because of the canopy of the trees and the thickness, and it's rough. Every one of those units are brutally rough. There are not roads everywhere. So you have to put a backpack on in each one of those units to get into gigantic bucks, and they're there. Jay, last year there were 20 bucks killed in the Catalinas that made Boone and Crockett between 115 and 130 that I personally know about.
Wow.
Now, I'm sure there are a lot more that were killed that I didn't know about, but that's what I know, that guys had called me and told me that hunter here and there. There's monster bucks in the Catalinas, but there's not a lot of access. That's the difference. You got Charlotte Gap coming in from the west side, and then you got the road from the Catalinas that go all the way up to Mount Lemmon, and then you got to go to the river and then cut up those washes and stuff to come up. There is just not roads in there, and that's what makes the Catalinas gigantic. On the front side of the Catalinas, right down downtown Tucson, all on the east side of that mountain range, there are monster bucks in people's backyards, all the way through Sabino Canyon. I mean, I'm talking Boone and Crockett bucks all in there.
Yeah, and 33 is also has the rincons in it. I was wondering, kind of compare and contrast the Catalinas and the rincons. You know, it's one of those things. They're pretty different type country to have in the same unit, but they're you know, obviously the rincons are not as big as the Catalinas, but it's a giant mountain range in its own right.
We've killed some great deer in the rincons over the years. And the rincons is exactly like that. There's a lot of roads that go nowhere that you have to park and then walk to, you know, way back into that country. And what makes the rincons, I think, a real gold mine is the Saguaro National Monument. All those deer on the Saguaro National Monument, which most people don't realize, the saguaros run all the way down into Tucson. But what's not being told, that monument runs all the way up to the top of the rincons on the west side, and there's no hunting there. So those monster bucks can live there, and they come off to rut.
Yeah, and it's those sanctuary places that allows those bucks to, you know, to grow up and get big and get old, and then, you know, they'll lower their guard down. You know, that late hunt in the Catalinas, say the last 5 days after Christmas. Has it been your experience that you see pretty good rutting activity that last 5 days, or you know, what is the norm for you in 33 for rutting?
That's when I have every client come in the day after Christmas on that hunt, and I tell them we'll see more bucks on the last 5 days than we've seen on the first 10.
Yeah, it's a
and that's
huge
why
difference.
you hit it right on the head. That's exactly right. And I do hunt that country you're talking about. But you got to realize there's no roads over there. You got to park it and walk into where the boundaries are, and those fingers coming off there, and invariably there'll be a gigantic buck. I've got 2 bucks in my book that I killed in there. They're in the 120s in the rincons.
Duwane, if you had to pick, if you just had to throw out a piece of country, like type of country, for someone to go find a giant buck, would it be ocotillo, mesquite, oak, or pine?
No, it'd be the high country. If you had to pick one, because the low country has them, but they can be killed pretty easy there once somebody figures it out. They can't be killed easy in the high country. So if you lace them up and go into that high country and stay, you're probably going to see a big buck if you have any kind of skill at all.
And don't you think it's one of those things when you do go to the high country, because it's so thick, that's what gives them their sanctuary. That's what gives them, you know, they're hard enough to see on an open hillside, nonetheless in the thick trees. That's what gives them their sanctuary. But the challenge is you go to the high country on these hunts, whether it's, you know, the first, second, third, fourth hunt, you got to be prepared to go, and maybe you go days and you don't even see a deer.
Well, I think that's exactly right. But I'm going to tell you something else that I think that the high country has that the low country doesn't have. And I really pay attention to this. If there's lions in there, any kind of lions, I don't hunt there, Jay. And what I found is those lions have killed more big bucks than I've ever seen.
So in other
And
words, how do you know if an area is really thick with lions? Do you talk to lion hunters? What?
yeah, oh Lord, yes, I know Wade Eccles, and I know Andy Knowlton, and those two boys are as good as there is, and I stay in touch with those guys. And when I see a lion somewhere, I call those two gentlemen. They're both quality individuals, and they go kill them. And that helps me, and it helps them as well. But listen, you can't have two or three toms work in an area and killing a deer every 3 or 4 or 5 days and think you're going to have 130 deer everywhere. You're not.
Well, we see a lot of that in Mexico. We love hunting Coues deer in Mexico, and some of these ranches, yeah, there's no other hunters on the property, but you go and you see, in 7 days you see 4 or 5 different lions, uh, and those are the ones you're seeing, and you wonder where your deer went. That in Mexico they don't hunt the lions near like they do in the United States. And I think that's a huge factor. And I think sometimes people come to Mexico and hunt Coues and they're like, I thought there was tons of deer in Mexico. And I say, well, some places there are, and it can change pretty quickly too. If you get a group of lion, if they move in there, all of a sudden you come back from one year to the next, and you've wiped your deer out. But I think lions are a huge part of big bucks, because it seems like they kill those big bucks too.
Well, I think they kill them very easily because most big bucks are like people. They're crippled up, they're old, they're arthritic, they can't run like a younger deer, and they're in those little rocky bluffs and rough places, and they're just easy cat kills. Listen, you take 4 lions, just like you said, that's 200 deer.
Right. That doesn't take long to wipe out a place.
No, any lion hunter will tell you that.
Yeah.
That they kill one a week. I mean, it's simple as that. So that wipes out a whole place. But what I found 2 years ago, we killed a deer, and and we're patting each other on the back. You got him, and I said that was a great shot. And one of my guides says, "Hey, Duwane, something's wrong." He said, "Look down there, the deer's crawling off." We got on the binoculars, let it daybreak, and we looked down there, and a lion had picked up the deer and was walking off with the deer that we had just shot.
Wow.
So one of the guides had a tag. He shot it, and we went down there, and it was ironic. There was 11 dead deer in that canyon that we found in the course of that day. 11 skeletons. I mean, they had been there for 6 months, 8 months. I don't know, 11 of them. As I got up at the top end of this thing, we jumped another lion coming out, and it took off running. We just killed one now, and this was a female, and that had to be a male, so I called Andy. I said, Andy, I'm at such and such place at such and such. I told him the story. He was there within about an hour and a half. He struck that lion, and chased that thing. He never caught it, but he chased up over a cliff, and he told me, he said, I never hunt down there, Duwane. I didn't think there was any lions. He said, I couldn't believe. He said, did you see all the dead deer? So if you don't think those lions are working those big bucks over, we're just kidding ourselves.
Yeah, for sure. I had Andy on the podcast a couple months ago and got a lot of great feedback. It was a riot talking to him. Let's talk 34A and the Santa Ritas. One of the most beautiful places, I think, in southern Arizona.
I like it a lot. I like the Santa Ritas a tremendous amount. It has every kind of hunting that you want, from the top of the mountain all the way down to the desert floor. There's a lot of access. It's a very good place to hunt deer. But the problem with that unit, to me, is all that access and all that roads, there's too many tags. Yeah. And so they have hurt 34A, I think, in my opinion, more than they have the other 3 big units that I told you about that you have to walk in. The 34A, the 36B, and 36A, those get hurt bad with all those tags because it's accessible to kill those deer.
Yeah, I mean, I would say they're great units. 34A is a great unit for people that want to go on their first Coues deer hunt. They want to see a lot of deer. I would totally agree with you that the trophy deer, the they're still there. There's still big deer there, but wouldn't you agree that there's so many tags? I mean, I'm looking at it here. There's 675 on the first, 675 on the second, 600 on the third, and 100 on
Yeah.
the late hunt. I mean, that's a ton of pressure. You can get around pretty good in the unit, pretty good access. I definitely think, for someone coming from out of state that maybe just is a first time, just wants to experience Coues deer hunting, it's a great unit because it's pretty good access and has good diversity of country. And it's just gorgeous for sure, but I think the quality definitely has declined a little bit.
Me too. I say the exact same thing.
Okay,
it's declined.
34B, the whetstones. I have never spent time in the whetstones at all, so I don't know that country.
Well, the whetstones has another one of those problems that we're talking about. A lot of private property there, a lot of private ranches, and access can be very difficult.
Okay. 35A, excluding Fort Huachuca. Now, I will say 35A, you start getting illegal aliens. You start getting some of that, traffic that you hear about and see about on the news. That's definitely a unit that jumps out at me as definitely one to make sure that you're aware. Beautiful place down there, Parker Canyon Lake Country. What do you know about 35A?
I know a lot about it, and there's some really good country down there. There's some really good deer. You just don't want to go around that base because those military guys, they're not nobody you want to mess with. So I wouldn't be hunting around the base or anywhere close to it. But off of it, there's some good country. All that Parker Canyon Lake and all of that stuff in there. There's some really good Coues deer country there, and a lot of good access. But it's oak country, so the deer have a tendency to survive better.
Yeah, I mean, there's some. It's a little thicker country. It doesn't quite have that. It does have ocotillo and it does have mesquite, but it doesn't have near as much as some of the other units. Would you agree? It's got more of that.
That's right.
Like Canelo Hills. It's got that rolling oak, and
yes,
some of those places are a little hard to hunt because there's not big, huge vantage points. It's kind of more rollers. Just beautiful to the eye, but a little bit more challenging to hunt. And I think there's a chance for a bigger buck to be around.
That's right. I think that's exactly right.
Okay, 35B, I've spent a little bit of time, but not very much, and I think it's kind of a sleeper. Curious what your thoughts are.
Well, we've hunted there. We've hunted there quite a bit, and then we got pulled away from there because of the drug peddling and that stuff that went on there.
That's
we
the Patagonias, right?
Yeah, we got kind of some, worried about that stuff. So hopefully that gets tamed down because, look, nobody wants to take their family member down there and have a run-in with drug lords. I mean, let's get serious.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So hopefully we get some of that turned down because a lot of those border units are tremendous good hunting, but they've had a lot of problems with people, and people are afraid of them.
36A, I have not spent any time in 36A. What mountain ranges are those, and what do you know about 36A?
That's the Sierra Colorados, and there's a bunch of just little tiny knobs out there, all out there, and there's hundreds of them. But it's mixed Coues deer and mule deer. And the mule deer and the Coues deer can be the exact same place. A lot of ocotillo, miles and miles and miles of ocotillo. On the frontage, on the east side, you have the Cerrita mine, and you have the Cat proving grounds, and they've tied all that property up on the east side along the freeway. But on the back side of that, once you figure out how to come in, there's some tremendous, very good hunting because most people, it takes a long time to figure out how to get around in there because there's hundreds and hundreds of roads, and it being state trust land, there is no road sign saying Road 27, Road 32. You got to go figure it out, and then once you figure it out, there's some tremendous places to hunt.
Okay, 36B, that's around Arivaca Junction, correct? Like the Buenos Aires?
Yeah, Arivaca and Peña Blanca, yes. And it's, to me, in my career growing up, it was one of the best units in the United States, And then they dumped so many tags, and I think there's 6, 7, 800. I don't know.
Yeah, there's
They changed it.
800 on the first, 800 on the second,
Yeah.
750 on the third, and 40 on the final hunt.
See, it's too many, and before they did that, my lord, we killed gigantic bucks in there all the time. But that extra, 200 and 300, for years there were 1,000 tags there, and they had 1,000, 1,000, and they cut it back. Well, it's still too much, and what's happened is they've literally worked it over, and there's not big bucks there. A 90-inch deer there is a big deer today.
Duwane, it seems like when I first started Coues deer hunting, now correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like you could hunt they blocked 36, all of the 36s, A, B, and C were together, and it seemed like maybe a 35A and 35B were together.
Right.
It seemed like maybe even 31, 32, 33, like huge
That's right.
blocks of unit, and how do you think there's more pressure now on the deer? Because I want to say that was 2,000 tags or something. Do you think there's more pressure now or more pressure then when they had it?
Oh, no, there's way more pressure now, Jay, because they've isolated
hunt structure? Yeah.
Yeah, they've isolated those hunts, and then they've dumped more tags in there than before when they had the blocks that you're talking about. They had those for years. And if somebody was hunting here, you could go to another unit. It was okay. Well, now those are the guys in the other unit. They can't leave their unit. They got to stay there. So they just keep attacking.
You know what, Dar and I was talking to my hunting partner, Dar, today, and one thing we were talking about is exactly that point. And, so if you break it into 4 hunts, basically what you get is each hunt, the first 3 or 4 days, you've got a whole nother group of gung-ho hunters. Whereas if you left it as 1 or 2 hunts, after 2 or 3 days, the hunters, they'd be, do a 2 or 3 day hunt and be done, and then the unit would not see much pressure. When you get these 4 hunt structures, you get new groups of guys every single hunt that are fired up for 4 or 5 days, and I agree with you. They put way more pressure on a unit than, say, if they just left one big hunt and even gave a 2-week season or something. I mean, I understand they're trying to create opportunity, but it is interesting because it definitely puts more pressure on the deer for sure.
Jay, I tell the clients and my guys that work for me, 10% of each hunt are killers. I don't care what unit it is or what hunt it is. 10% of those people. So if you have 600 people, you got 60 killers out there. That's usually the figure. Those are guys that are going to backpack. They're the guys that's going to go the extra mile. They're going to scout. The 90%, it's just life. They're there with their friends. They're going to hunt the weekend, and they got to go back to work, and that's just the way it is. So when you start adding 800, now you got 80 guys out there that are killers.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's finish up here on Unit 36C, and that's the Baba Kivris, and I haven't been in it in years, but it's just a really neat mountain range. It borders Mexico and borders the Tohono O'odham on, I believe, the west side, and Baba Kivri Peak, and it's just some real historical ranches and stuff in there. What's your thoughts on 36C? It used to be kind of the crown jewel. People really talked about it. What is the status of the unit now?
Well, it's not, and it used to be. That's exactly right. And I think what really hurt it more than anything else was all the aggravation with the helicopters and the Border Patrol chasing the illegals across the mountain range there. I guide there periodically every year on some hunt, and last year was no exception. We were chasing a nice buck, and a helicopter come in the canyon and come right down the middle of the canyon with a helicopter at about 100 feet. Now look, every deer in the canyon run out, including the deer that we were seeing. When you start doing that, 365 days out of the year, you got a problem. And I think that's been more problem, Jay, than hunters and anything else. There was horseback guys in there. 2 days before that happened, 25, 26, Border Patrol guys chasing some drug lords. They told us, and they're all over the ridges. You just can't hunt when you have that kind of craziness
Chaos,
going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, and and there's gigantic bucks used to be there all the time, but I mean they've cut roads in there that you couldn't use to. There was no roads. Now they got roads in there so they can get their trucks in there, and they're running on top of those ridges into the Toho Autumn, all over that country where they used to never do that, because now the drug lords are coming up the reservation across an I-8. You see that on TV, so it's turned into a mess.
I remember the coyotes used to be kind of a hidden gem, on the northern part of the unit, a real rock pile. But
sure.
Historically, some giant bucks shot there in the coyotes. I haven't been down there in years, but just real interesting country for sure.
Still good.
A lot of Ocotillo, not a lot of oaks in that country. Some around Baba Kivri Peak, but primarily a lot of Ocotillo, a lot more deserty country. But I mean, over the last 30 years, there have been handfuls of giants shot out in those desert flats.
Still very good. The coyotes are still as good. They're better than the Baba Kivris, because by the time they get to the end of that mountain range, the illegals have spread out and tried to go to the roads.
Yeah.
So it's not that much problem there.
Okay, before we conclude here, I'm looking at the youth deer seasons. It's speaking about Coues deer. In some of this country, there's 23 youths. Let's see. There's a 21, a 22, a 23. Those are all October 13th through the 19th. Unit 27, and then there's some earlier hunts. October 6th through the 12th. 28, 31, and 32 are lumped together. 29, 30A, and 30B. There's two youth hunts in 33, one in 34A. If you're talking to dads or uncles or grandpas out there with kids, and they're looking at youth hunts, in your mind, what are the best youth hunts for Coues deer?
Well, I would hunt anything but 33. The 33 is too tough for kids. And I would hunt those units that I told you about, the 34A, 36, 36A, any of those units that are really easy, pretty easy walking, pretty easy to see a deer, so a kid doesn't have to hurt himself. But 33, every year, a client will call me, and he drew a tag, and they struggled with their kids up there because it's rough. It's really rough.
Good. That's good advice. I just realized those are any antler deer, which I think is pretty good to give the kids an opportunity to shoot mule deer or Coues deer. And sometimes you can hunt some of that lower country and have mule deer and Coues both. But the key, I think, Duwane, is get those kids out there and don't make it a trophy hunt. Make it fun. And make it enjoyable.
Right.
Any advice you could give to dads taking their kids?
I'm going to close by telling a story that every father, and I give this in seminars. And my daughter was 10 years old, and me and two of my friends that worked for me took her deer hunting. And the first deer I seen, I told her, "You're shooting." She said, "Okay, Dad. We're not hunting trophies. We're going to kill one." And we glassed a little 2-point mule deer. And this was in 36A. We got within range. She shot and she killed it, and it was a great hunt to this day. And my daughter's 37 years old today, and she is tickled to death with this. We went down and we gutted the deer, and we took pictures and just hugged and cried and did everything. We put the deer, deboned it, and got back up on top of a ridge and was getting ready to go down the next ridge to the truck. And here comes this gentleman screaming at the top of his lungs at this little boy for dragging the gun and his jacket. And we could hear this gentleman cussing and screaming like a moron. And, man, I don't get mad, Jay, but that was horrible and disgusting. The boy was in tears, crying. So I told my daughter, I said, "Mary," and I said, "Do you mind if we hunt this little boy?" And she said, "No, Dad." I said, "Let's go down and help that little boy." So we walked down there, me and my guys and my daughter. And when we got down there, he had every kind of excuse in the world that there were no deer, Jay. But he never stopped and glassed 5 seconds. All he did was scream at that kid. And I told him, I said, would you like to kill a deer? I told the little boy, and he looked up at me. I said, "Could you kill one? I'll take you." And he said, "Yeah, I would like to." I said, "Let's go back up on this knob." We got up there. The dad didn't bring no water, Jay. He didn't have a backpack. It was a miserable hunt for the child. Miserable. We gave him some water, had a Gatorade, gave him a candy bar. My daughter was talking to the boy back and forth, and one of my guys didn't last 15 seconds, and he found another 2-point over there. And I said, "There's the deer. Right there, son." So we got him over there, and his dad had a .243 that a scope that was worthless. You couldn't see a car out of it. Worthless, Jay. And the boy kept trying to see it. So finally I figured out, I said, "Let me see that gun, son." Jay, the scope was worthless. You couldn't even see. It was filthy. You couldn't, 4 power. It was his dad probably gave it to the guy. So I had a Best of the West rifle that they had gave me years ago. And I had that gun. And I set that gun on a backpack, and I set the boy down there, and we ranged a deer. It was about 300 yards. I clicked the scope, and I said, "Do you see the deer, son?" And we sat there, and he said, "I do see it, sir." I said, "Just pull the trigger." He pulled the trigger 2 or 3 times, and I dry fired it. I said, "Do you got it again?" He said, "Yeah." And he didn't know on the 4th time that I closed the bolt and put the shell in the barrel. And I said, "Now listen to me. Do the exact same thing, son. Hold it against your shoulder tight." I told him, "Just take your time. The gun goes off, Jay, the deer collapses." We go down there, and we took all kinds of pictures with this young boy. This kid, to this day, calls me.
Yeah.
Thanking me, Jay. I'm already crying. Thanking me.
Yeah. That's pretty awesome. That's neat that you took the time to do that, and I think it's important for anybody listening, whether you're taking a child or a new hunter, to make sure they have a good experience and make it fun for them, because that's what we need. We need more hunters out there, and we need to make it fun. And we talk about killing big bucks, and Duane's had an unbelievable career killing 499 Coues deer and all of that. But, Duwane would probably tell you some of the smallest deer that he's ever shot are some of the happiest moments. And
that's right.
And a lot of times it's not about, as much as we're into killing big giant deer, it's, a lot of times it's not all about that. And, Duwane, it's awesome having you on the podcast again. I just love watching the success that you have, and it's you've taught me a lot. You've got an incredible book that I've read, and you're just you're a legend in the state of Arizona, and I'm just happy to have you on the podcast. And I want to give you a chance to let the listeners know how they can reach you, how they can get a hold of you before this draw deadline, and then hopefully after the draw deadline, they'll be listening to this podcast as well. And how can they reach you?
Well, they can call me at my phone number at 520-385-4995, or they can look me up on the web at Arizona Big Game Hunting, Duwane Adams, and I'd love to talk to them, even if they don't hire me. I love to talk to people, to any way I can help people to try to kill a quality animal.
Well, Duwane, thank you so much for that, and just like I said, I'm very thankful to have you on the podcast, and wish you the best of success. And I know God has blessed you in many, many ways, and I'm happy for that. And tell your family hello, and I'll see you down the road here.
And God bless you, and the Lord has blessed me. That's the truth. The Lord blessed me in many ways. God bless you, Jay. You have a great show, and I'm honored to be on it.
All right, buddy. Thank you so much. Take care.
God bless you. Bye-bye. Bye.